Hello and welcome to this new episode of AfriCafe. Today we are going to discuss natural disasters. We will try to understand their economic impacts in African communities and economies. Join us today.
Despite contributing the least to global warming, Africa is one of the most vulnerable regions to natural disasters and climate change impacts. Natural disasters, including droughts, floods, landslides, and storms, are occurring with regularity in the continent, and climate change is exacerbating the frequency and severity of these weather-related hazards. Since 1970, Africa has endured over 2,000 natural disasters, nearly half of which occurred in the last decade. By 2030, an estimated 118 million extremely poor individuals will be exposed to droughts, floods, and extreme heat, exacerbating their vulnerability to recurrent disasters, which in turn impede growth and hinder poverty alleviation efforts. As Africa confronts fiscal constraints and inadequate policy frameworks in managing escalating disaster risks, promoting a proactive strategy becomes imperative.
Welcome to this new episode of AfriCafe, where we'll bring you insightful conversations with experts, policymakers, and leaders from various fields. Disasters, whether they are natural or man-made, have devastating impacts on lives and livelihoods. The costs of response and reconstruction are further amplified by economic downturn, infrastructure damage, businesses closures, reduced tax revenues, and increased poverty levels. Disasters does not affect everyone equally. Children, women, girls, elderly individuals, persons with disabilities, indigenous people, and other marginalized communities, particularly in lower income countries, bear a disproportionate burden of the impacts of such phenomena. Some countries like Brazil, for example, have made some significant strides in disaster risk management, shifting from reactive responses to proactive prevention and preparedness, and this approach has led to a reduction in loss of lives and mitigating the economic impacts. To understand the diverse impacts of natural disasters on African communities and economies, we will explore the Brazilian experience in this field with Professor Eduardo Haddad, who is joining us today in this conversation. Professor, welcome and thank you for accepting our invitation.
Thank you, Ahmed.
So you are a full professor at the Department of Economics at the University of Sao Paulo, and you are an affiliate professor at the Mohammed VI University here in Morocco, and the senior fellow in the Policy Center for the New South. Can you please tell us how do natural disasters affect lives, economies, and communities in Brazil?
Okay, thank you, Ahmed, for having me here. Well, if you think about both natural disasters or man-made disasters in Brazil, let's focus on the natural disasters because there are two major types that are more frequent in Brazil. And they are all climate related. So on one hand, we have those related to lack of rain, related to drought that affects important areas of the country. And on the other side, we have those related to excess of rain, related to floods and landslides. Well, what are the difference in the way Brazil deals with this type of disaster? So if you look at what happened when there is a major drought in a region, communities are going to be suffered directly because of with the lack of resources for their everyday life. And of course, there is also a spatial propagation of these effects. So if you have some climate-related event that affects the productivity of an important agriculture area, this impact, this lower productivity is going to propagate across the country. It's going to reach the productive system through the agribusiness, but also it's going to reach cities when people will face higher prices for their agriculture-related products. So that's mainly an event, climate-related event that's going to affect mainly the economy. And it's going to propagate from the local where the drought occurs to the whole country. When you look at floods, for instance, then you see, as you mentioned, in Brazil, every summer, the city of São Paulo, or the metropolitan area, that accounts for 20% of the national GDP, 10% of the population. Every summer you have major flooding events and the city stops, right? There are problems related to people, and usually, as you mentioned, the more vulnerable are those that face the larger losses. But for the economy as a whole, a very local phenomenon, climate-related flood phenomenon, may affect the whole economy. Imagine an economy that responds for 20% of GDP that's connected with all other regions of the country. When the city stops, it has consequences for the whole country. Right? How does Brazil manage both things? Right? Well, there's always a way of trying to prevent that or to prepare when it happens. A lot of adaptation policies are taking place. Right? For instance, if you go to the agriculture sector, we have Embrapa, which is a research company associated with the agriculture sector that try to generate seeds for crops to be more resistant to climate variability. When you go to floods or excessive rain-related issues, you have CEMADEM, which is an institution that deals with the disaster management of the country, and you are able now to anticipate an event and relocate rapidly the population.
So most of the disasters we are right now witnessing in Brazil are not only affecting rural areas, but also big cities that are also national GDP drivers. Do you confirm that?
All disasters, they have a specific location, right? And that's going to affect initially the local population and the local economy. But all economies, they are, if you look at the country, within country, the economies are interdependent. So whenever you have a local shock, it tends to propagate to other areas of the country. Think about the earthquake we had here in Morocco in September, right? It was, the epicenter was concentrated in Al Haous and the surrounding provinces. But we did here a study at the Policy Center showing not only the effects of the damage that propagated to the whole economy, but also the recovery plans. We made an ex-ante impact assessment showing that's going to go beyond the most affected provinces. Well, I gave a couple of examples for Brazil, the Embrapa case, right? So, the situation in terms of disasters in Africa is more complex than in Brazil. In Brazil, we have a concentration of climate-related disasters, but here, beyond climate, you have some other types of natural disasters and man-made disasters at different scales, right? But we can learn from other experience, even from the Brazilian experience, right? If you go to regions that face weather-related shocks, given the importance of the agriculture in this economy, I'm talking drought about as a disaster. It's maybe we think more extreme event that generates an economic loss shock that may, depending on how the local economy and local populations affected, we may think as a issue related to a calamity. But yes, we can learn, we can prepare in advance if you can do research, in this case, as Embrapa does for Brazil, to get more resistant seeds, to generate more resistant crops. You can map vulnerable areas. Here, for instance, we are doing a study for the World Bank for Egypt, to looking at sea level rise impacts in Alexandria and other cities on the coast. And you see that because of climate change, the frequency and intensity of extreme events that generate floods, that may generate problems in other productive sectors of the economy, it's going to increase, right? So the return period of an event, a climate-related event, is going to be smaller and smaller. If a problem that would happen every 100 years, maybe now it's going to happen every 70 years, 50 years. So we have to prepare ourselves. We have to adapt ourselves. In the case of sea level rise, there's a whole engineering strategy for adapting the local infrastructure to receive higher tides more frequently, right? You can do that, but it costs money. That's the issue. The issue is that it costs money, right? And countries like Brazil, countries in Africa, they face fiscal constraints. How do we fund this, right? So it's necessary to create some kind of mechanisms with international solidarity. Of course, there are many, but to increase the scale so that countries with a lower capacity of mitigate or prepare, adapting, they can be in a better position.
Today, I think there is an awareness in Africa to address natural disasters through national public policies. To what extent do you think that regional collaboration can help drive this change when it comes to governance, creating institutions that can address effectively such phenomena?
There are already some initiatives in this direction. Some work better than others, but I think that's the way to go at regional and global level, right? Because there are some at the end of the day, right? You have to prepare yourselves. To prepare yourselves, it costs money. Right.
When we talk about prevention and preparedness, where should we start? Is it a matter of governance, institutions, or should it go from urban communities to rural communities? How should this function?
Everything in the same basket, yes, all together. So you need coordination, and that's why the role of the central or the local government is important, depending on the scale of the event for which you want to prepare yourself, right? But it's coordination, I think, is the key role with resources. There are some initiatives that are not that expensive that we see in Brazil in many areas, in areas that are where you have a lot of vulnerable population living in the on the mountains, in the slides of the mountains that are prone to landslides when you have heavy rain. It's basically to anticipate the climate event, and there's technology for that. I mean, you can tell a few hours in advance that there's going to be a storm in that area, and you put a system of sirens or other ways of tell people to evacuate the area so that you can save lives. Right? This is very common in some areas in Brazil, in some of the experience leading for these institutions, some of them that I mentioned.
Okay. What about the use of early warning systems? I think we have been many institutions talk about early warning systems.
Yeah, that's basically what I have in mind when you're talking about these mechanisms in the mountain regions in Brazil. You know, you anticipate. You have to have information. Information is crucial. You have to anticipate that an extreme event or that a disaster is likely to happen, right? And you warn the inhabitants, and you have to have, that's why coordination is important, right? You have to create awareness of the local population. You have to generate the itinerary for people to evacuate, and you have to guarantee that they won't be left behind once the event occurs, and in the event of something bad happen to their homes.
Yeah. Let's go back to the earthquake that happened in Morocco, in which you are writing a paper about. Can you talk about more about this experience and how the Moroccan authorities have tried to manage this this disaster?
Okay, so what we did was basically together with colleagues from the Policy Center, we are trying to estimate first the cost of the damage to the local economy and for the country economy. And then there is a recovery plan set by the government, a 5-year plan that's aimed to not only to recover, to rebuild the infrastructure that was damaged by the earthquake, but also to upgrade, right? It goes beyond a recovery plan. It's basically a regional development plan for the High Atlas region, which is the region that was more affected by the earthquake. And what we see, the basic issue that we have is that there are 120 billion dirhams planned to be invested in the region. And the whole issue is, where does these resources are coming? Where do the resources come from, right? Because if the government decide to use as a new money increasing debt, right, that's going to benefit not only the High Atlas region, but also the Moroccan economy as a whole, at least in this short term, right? Because debt has to be repaid. But the more likely and more fiscally responsible strategy for financing this resource to rebuild and upgrade the infrastructure in the High Atlas region is basically to do a regional reallocation of investments, right? Probably the idea, and we simulate that, you take resource from other regions of the country and put there. What's going to happen? Maybe a zero-sum game for the country, but you see the region positioning itself in a better situation than it used to be. So that's why it has this regional development flavor when you do something that with an amount of resource that is to a greater extent more than those requested for rebuilding the infrastructure, the damaged infrastructure as it used to be.
Okay, so we talked about Egypt and the coastal area that are very fragile. We talked about Morocco and how the response of the construction is being used as a regional development response to the earthquake. I want to talk about at a global level, the role of humanitarian aid, for example, when natural disasters happens. Do you think that they are very effective, and what role do they play when it comes to risk management disasters today?
I think they have a very important role, because usually they're the first to arrive in the places when the disaster occurs, right? And it's resources that are usually the most needed for the affected population in that very moment. So it's very important. The difficulties that they may face are related to access the targeted population, and that's something that, I mean, when you have a disaster, depending on the nature of the disasters, it's hard to access, right, people that were affected, infrastructure that were affected. But in terms of the population, the community, I think those humanitarian aids are crucial for, in the very first moment, to provide some relief for the affected population.
Okay. Can you please give us a final assessment about risk, about the risk management in Africa? Final assessment.
Yeah.
And what are the key lessons that we have
I think we have to prepare ourselves, because, I mean, the frequency of earthquakes is not going to change, right? But the frequency and the intensity of climate-related disasters is going to increase, right? We have to prepare ourselves in a coordinated way, right? And in the case of Africa, relying not only on regional strategies, but also on a global solidarity, at least for the moment.
Okay. Thank you very much, Professor Haddad.
Okay,
thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you very much, and see you in a captivating episode. Thank you.